The Beatles.
They were okay. I mean, I was never as big a Beatles.
On your record albums, you can send away for the scores.
Yeah, I know there are people like that, but I don't personally know too many of them. I know that they exist, but I'm not on enough.
He shredded guitars like a composer, roasted rock stars with surgical precision, and made weird sound cool before it was ever trending. Frank Zappa wasn't just a musician. He was a one-man rebellion against everything fake, lazy, or overhyped in the music industry. While other artists memorized solos and played it safe, Zappa improvised every single night. "It's me against the laws of nature," he once said. "I don't know what I'm going to play. It's a one-time thing, unique, dangerous, and real." That same attitude fueled his biggest opinions. Zappa didn't worship the so-called gods of rock. He questioned them. And if he thought your band was overrated, he wasn't shy about it. He'd call you out live, lay it down on tape, or drop it straight into the press. In this video, we're counting down the top 5 bands Frank Zappa hated the most, the legends he mocked, the icons he dissected, and the sacred cows he turned into punchlines. Whether you agree with him or not, one thing's clear. When Frank Zappa took aim, he didn't miss. And the echoes of what he said still shake the stage today. Number 5. The Velvet Underground. On paper, Frank Zappa and the Velvet Underground should have been allies, 2 underground icons pushing boundaries in the 60s. But instead of bonding over experimental music, they clashed almost instantly. It all started in 1966, when the Velvets performed in Los Angeles as part of Andy Warhol's Exploding Plastic Inevitable. Zappa allegedly made a sarcastic comment about the whole scene, Warhol, the art kids, and especially the band. And just like that, a feud was born. Lou Reed, never one to hold back, fired back with full force. "Frank Zappa is the most untalented musician I've ever heard," he reportedly said. "He can't play rock and roll because he's a loser." Bandmate Sterling Morrison added, "If you told Frank Zappa to do something outrageous just to sell records, he'd probably do it." Zappa didn't return fire in the press, but according to his bandmate Jimmy Carl Black, he really disliked them. The biggest reason? Drugs. Zappa was famously anti-drug, and the Velvet Underground were knee-deep in that scene. And yet, the story doesn't end with pure hate. Years later, Zappa spun Velvet Underground tracks during his radio sets and even called them authentic. And in a twist of fate, Lou Reed later inducted Zappa into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. For a while, though, these two counterculture giants couldn't have been farther apart. Same era, different philosophies, and absolutely no interest in pretending otherwise. Number 4, Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin were rock royalty, loud, legendary, and larger than life. But to Frank Zappa, they were exactly what was wrong with big-time rock and roll. Zappa didn't just roll his eyes at Zeppelin. He mocked them, publicly, playfully, and with razor-sharp precision. During his 1988 tour, he shocked his band by performing a reggae-style parody of Stairway to Heaven. His guitarist Mike Keneally said Zappa had never even listened to the whole song before. He just knew it was the one to roast. Once Zappa finally did hear the famous solo, he critiqued it on the spot, calling the chord progression boring. But he still insisted on playing it live, just to blow people's minds. This wasn't the first time he poked at Zeppelin. On his Fillmore East, June 1971 album, Zappa repeatedly joked about the band's infamous backstage mud shark incident, turning it into rock's most absurd running gag. He also tossed in jabs on earlier albums, referring to Robert Plant with nicknames like Robert Planet. What Zappa saw wasn't a powerhouse band, it was a circus. Gongs, long solos, groupie lore. It all felt bloated and indulgent to him. While the world watched Zeppelin conquer stadiums, Zappa watched with arms crossed, guitar in hand, waiting for the perfect moment to turn their legend into satire. To him, it wasn't personal. It was about principle. He didn't hate Zeppelin for being successful. He hated what they symbolized, excess without accountability. Number 3, the Beatles. The Beatles may be the most beloved band in music history, but Frank Zappa wasn't buying the hype. While the rest of the world worshipped John, Paul, George, and Ringo, Zappa was quietly, and not so quietly, tearing them down. They thought they were gods, he once said. They were just a good commercial group. That one line summed up Zappa's biggest gripe. The world saw the Beatles as visionaries, but he saw them as a slick pop product with psychedelic packaging. He made his point loud and clear in 1968, with We're Only in It for the Money, a full-on parody of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The original album cover was such a savage take on the Beatles' masterpiece that his label hid it inside the record sleeve. But Zappa's message was front and center. These so-called revolutionaries were just cashing in on a trend. Zappa's former assistant Pauline Butcher later explained, "He wasn't a pretty boy like the Beatles. He didn't even like their kind of music. So he made himself stand out. He got outrageous, posed on toilets, wore crazy clothes. It was all calculated to make people pay attention." And in a move that confused many, Zappa even claimed he preferred the Monkees over the Beatles. Why? Because at least the Monkees were honest about being manufactured. To Zappa, it was never about whether you had hits. It was about whether you had something real to say. And the Beatles, for all their brilliance, never earned his respect as artists who challenged the system. They were the system. Number 2, Jim Morrison. The Doors. Frank Zappa didn't hate Jim Morrison as a person, but he absolutely rejected what Morrison came to represent. To Zappa, the Doors weren't just a band, they were a marketing creation, inflated by media hype and dripping in theatrical myth. "I knew Jim Morrison," Zappa once said in an interview. "My wife even played with him when they were kids. But what bothered me wasn't Jim. It was what people turned him into." That transformation into the Lizard King drove Zappa up the wall. The magazine Crawdaddy dubbed Morrison the Messiah of rock, and suddenly his brooding poetry and shirtless performances were seen as sacred. Zappa wasn't buying it. He later told Guitar World, "I'm not picking on Jim Morrison. I'm talking about the machinery, the hype, the exaggeration. Americans eat that stuff up. They want the glossy version of reality." And Jim was just one example. Zappa had no patience for that kind of rock star myth-making. While Morrison leaned into mysticism and excess, Zappa was all about control, clarity, and cold-eyed realism. To Zappa, the Doors weren't dangerous or deep. They were a case study in how the industry sells illusion, and nothing irritated him more than audiences falling for it. Number 1, Jethro Tull. Topping Frank Zappa's list of musical pet peeves was a band known for flutes, folklore, and prog rock precision, Jethro Tull. While many fans admired their complex compositions and theatrical flair, Zappa saw something else entirely. A British export cashing in on American audiences while, in his eyes, missing the point. Jethro Tull's frontman Ian Anderson once admitted, "I read that Zappa didn't like us back in the 70s. He resented British bands like us, Led Zeppelin, and Deep Purple coming to the U.S. and making loads of money while he was grinding to keep his own band afloat." Anderson admired Zappa's music and influence, but their paths never crossed. Near the end of Zappa's life, Anderson got a message from one of Zappa's bandmates. "Frank wants to speak to you." But Anderson never made the call. "I didn't know how to talk to someone I'd never met, especially when they'd been so unkind about us in the press," he said. "What do you say to someone for the first time when they're dying?" Zappa, it seemed, just couldn't take Jethro Tull seriously. The pageantry, the medieval imagery, the stylized vocals, it all struck him as forced. While Anderson saw it as art, Zappa may have seen it as indulgent fantasy. To some, Zappa's criticism felt unfair. But for a man who prized originality and brutal honesty, Tull's grandiosity rubbed him the wrong way. And so, despite the flutes, the folklore, and the fans, Zappa held the line. For him, Jethro Tull wasn't just a band he didn't like. They were the very embodiment of what he believed rock should never become. So there you have it, the 5 bands Frank Zappa reportedly couldn't stand, and the reasons why he was never afraid to speak out. For most musicians, calling out rock royalty like the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, or Jim Morrison would have been career suicide. But for Zappa, it was just another day of telling the truth as he saw it. Zappa didn't throw insults just to stir the pot. He wasn't petty, and he wasn't jealous. He simply had a zero-tolerance policy for what he saw as empty hype, artistic laziness, or media-fueled myths. In an industry built on image, he was obsessed with substance. If your music lacked depth or honesty, he wouldn't just ignore it. He'd roast it with wit, satire, and sometimes even a full-blown psalm. What made Zappa so unique wasn't just his talent. It was his refusal to compromise. He didn't chase trends. He didn't water things down. And he definitely didn't care if his opinions made him unpopular. He was, at his core, an artist who believed in pushing boundaries, not just musically, but intellectually. And while some of the bands he criticized have gone on to become icons, it's worth remembering that Zappa's music still challenges people today. His legacy isn't just in albums or performances. It's in how he forced the world to look at the music industry a little more critically. He once said, "Without deviation from the norm, progress is not possible." That quote sums up his entire career, and maybe even his entire personality. Frank Zappa didn't hate for attention. He critiqued because he cared. And even when he tore down other artists, it came from a place of wanting music to be better, bolder, and more meaningful. So the real question isn't just, who did Zappa hate? It's, who would he call out if he were alive today? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Who do you think Zappa was right about? And which of these bands do you love anyway, despite the shade? If you enjoyed this deep dive into rock's most brilliant troublemaker, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more stories that challenge the myths and celebrate the minds that dare to defy them.